All right. So next week, my father's 80th birthday, and you're wondering, how does that affect you? He lives in another state, so I'm going because, your dad's only 80 once, and yeah, unless he lies, and then he can be 80 more than once. My dad is like, I don't care. He's just old, and that's the way he is. But yeah, no, he might lie. My mom was 39 for a really long time, and it was tricky because my grandmother was 39 as well. So we were like, why is everyone 39? But they were. But I am leaving on Wednesday. So Thursday class, I still haven't decided if we'll have it in person, and then maybe I'll get my 80-year-old dad to lead the class, because he actually will remember some of the stuff that we're talking about next week, because we get into the 50s and 60s. Actually, he says the 50s were his favorite decade. That will tell you some stuff about my dad. One, he's probably not honest. That's also kind of a thing of that generation. My dad will always tell me, no, the 50s were great. Everything was great when I was a kid. My dad grew up in the Ozarks with occasionally a dirt floor and no running water. So yeah, probably everything was great, and they ate squirrels. So that's cool. Yeah, I know. But he did like the 50s, honestly, because of the cars. Not gonna lie, that was it. And he graduated from high school in 59, I think it was. So yeah, end of the 50s. And I guess they like the music. And we're all partial to the music of our generation. Yeah, and I don't know if you guys are partial to your music, because I don't know what it is. I'm sure it's amazing, although I heard stuff about the Grammys and the dancing. Old people, we get nervous about stuff. Um, and then last week at some soccer board meeting, one of the people said that he had new rules and he was going to count them. And then he was upset that I didn't get that as a cultural reference. And I said, remember, I'm older than your parents, so I'm not supposed. But I will either have class from Ohio, and then we'll bring in Dad, maybe. Probably not. But you never know. Or I'll give you guys a recording and you can watch. That would be fun, wouldn't it? Yeah. Okay. All right, let's look at stuff. And again, if you came in a little late, and don't be offended. I know technology, and you had another class. You don't have to explain. It's fine. I'm still working on grading, and I know that some of you want extra credit, and I know I'm supposed to look and decide if I want to curve the quizzes. I know, I'm just behind. Crud. Yeah. Okay. But catching up tomorrow, because whatever I did have some other stuff to do, but I told them no. So I've got to get caught up with you guys. So I apologize. Goodness. All right. So let's look at weekly question. Weekly question. Last week was okay. Weekly question. Here we go. So last week was World War II being the good war, and I'm so honestly really interested in what you have to say about that. So I will be very happy to grade those tonight or tomorrow. I think you're going to be the tomorrow morning grading for that question, because I'm wrapping up the what was the thing before that? Yeah, the New Deal questions. Those have been okay-ish, to be honest with you. Some of the New Deal things are really long, and you just keep saying the same thing over and over. The last one I read, I'm just going to say out loud, I'm pretty sure, like I don't want to say that, I said I was going to say it, that you copied and pasted really similar stuff from two different sources. I'm going to always suggest to you that what the source you should use, the textbook, really, because the questions, as a rule, are designed so I'm getting the textbook for you. The purple thing is beautiful. Beautiful. The section headings are pretty good, and you can always use the index. Also, one of the things I noticed, and I know I've mentioned this before, yeah, that's pretty weird. One of the things, World War II and Donald Trump. But Donald Trump was he around at the, well, no, he wasn't around during World War II. He would have been born right after it. My dad was born in 41 and is slightly older than Donald Trump, but not much. Um, no, I always told my dad he should run for president because if we were going to have two senior citizens, this is going to tell you way too much about my politics, probably. I'd rather have one that isn't going to stay up all night and tweet, or one that can remember who his wife is and who his sister is. So, I know, I was honestly really 0 for 2 on our presidential candidates. It's like, really? This is what we have? So no offense if you really liked Trump or you really liked Biden. I don't have anything against them personally. I appreciate anyone's willingness to serve our country, but okay, I've said too much, haven't I? But the New Deal stuff, a lot of you were name dropping, like some of the last one, and I shouldn't say the last one I read, but one of the ones I read today is like a man named John Maynard Keynes. It's like, you got to tell me who he is. Or FDR had an advisor named Louis Brandeis. That's a Supreme Court justice. So, John Maynard Keynes is a major economist of the time period that recommended that the only way for a country to get out of a severe depression was planned deficit spending. And that matters because other countries also listened to that fellow's advice. He wasn't, some random guy, or he wasn't even a US guy. He was a British economist. So people listened to him because probably London School of Economics, that kind of thing. So I think it helps you to figure out who these people are. And I know I probably tell you from time to time, your book is the best source of information. I still think it is. You could look the people up in the index as well. It's got a glossary kind of thing in the back, I think, as well. I know it does. And that might help you just to kind of know who those people are. And then somebody just mentioned the president, but didn't say his name. And always dates matter. And there seemed to be a lot of, I don't know if it's confusion or if it was just the way you wrote stuff. So you may have known, you just didn't write it in a way that reflected that you knew. I don't know if that's the best way to say that, but a lot of people talked about the New Deal as a law. And the New Deal was a program, and there's literally hundreds of different laws passed over, I don't know, 5 or 6 years, maybe even longer, because first New Deal is kind of that 33 thing, and the second New Deal is the 35 thing, and then there's a recession in 37, so they're going to add some more stuff. And a lot of you, mentioned the New Deal stuff and didn't talk about whether it worked or any of that kind of thing. And I realized too, when the question just says, talk about these things, it doesn't tell you explain it, define it, talk about whether it worked or not. But there's an assumption in a history class that you're not just going to make a list of stuff, that you're going to explain what something was and tell me why it mattered. And in the process of doing that, tell me when it happened, because in history, we like that kind of stuff. And I know I already gave you the lecture last week about, don't necessarily tell me this guy was dumb or this guy was racist. So, be sure if you're going to evaluate them in that way, make sure you give evidence that shows why you made that evaluation. Yeah, all right. I've talked enough about that, haven't I? All right. So our question for today. By 1952, the Cold War was cast in terms of a worldwide battle between freedom and slavery. Yeah, freedom and slavery, good and evil, seems to be themes of this time period. Explain 1, how the Cold War came to be seen in this way. 2, events that illustrate this view. And 3, the historical consequences of such a view. And I even gave you numbers on this one. So I've also mentioned a few times, and did so again this morning when I was grading, organization. Organization always matters when you write, because paragraphs seem like random things perhaps to you, but they help break up the reading. So I think the really logical way to answer this question is to start off with, well, to have 3 paragraphs. one where you talk about what the Cold War was and how it came to be viewed as freedom and slavery, then maybe a second paragraph where you talk about the events that illustrate the view, and then a third paragraph where you talk about the historical consequences of a view. You can always have a separate intro and conclusion if you like. I'm also going to remind you like to do a spell check and stuff like that, because normally when you're typing, you get a little squiggly line under stuff that's wrong. I do at least. So, and I'm not a master of technology. So, and I have no, I don't have an old computer. I was going to say I have an old computer, but I don't, because someone gave me a computer because my other one was 10 years old and they thought that was tragic. But I know that it's not an English class, except more clearly you communicate, the more points you're going to get. And whatever job you have, writing is going to be a part of it. It is. Yeah. Okay. Have I lectured enough about writing? All right. The Union wanted emancipation, Confederacy. Yeah. Okay. Yeah. And we liked, it's really nice. I mean, that's a nice analogy. And I think this is an era, especially coming out of World War II, because, you know, the last question, the good war, good and evil was fairly well defined, at least in propaganda, you know, and no one could deny like Hitler bad and Japan and their atrocities bad. But then, as I'm certain many of you noted, the atomic bomb, not exactly good, and racism within our own military and uh, the internment camps also not good. So, and certainly on a different scale, however, still on the scale. So we want to try to define our side as being noble and pure, and the other side as being evil. And the other side, in this instance, the evil, godless communists, they are going to do the same thing. So if you're wondering, like, was that fair of us? It's like, it's a propaganda war. I have no idea, fair, unfair, that sort of stuff. You get to decide that. But the Soviet Union and their satellites, as we will call them, are going to do the same thing. And they're going to have a pretty good opportunity to make us look bad because of some racist issues that we have in the United States, which happen to coincide with the civil rights movement, which happens to coincide with the Cold War, which happens to lead to some propaganda that suggests that if you're a civil rights leader, you are also, yes, a communist because you're making the United States look bad. Now, we will get over that. We will. But if you have old relatives, like, I don't know, my 80-year-old dad, if you got an 80-year-old relative who lived in the United States during that time period, you could do as I did with my dad. My mom died really young. Otherwise, I probably would have asked her, although she didn't like to talk about history as much and had a little bit of a temper. So she would have gotten mad at me if I'd asked her this. But I asked my dad, it's like, when you were in the 50s, his favorite decade, I said, did you have friends, relatives who talked about Martin Luther King Jr. as a communist? And he would say, he told me, he's like, yeah, absolutely. That's how we saw him. And then, you know, as I got older, I saw him in a different way. And there you go. Yeah. My mom was like, how dare you judge my, yeah, because you know, everybody's got that family member. Yeah, that was my mom. Not that I don't love and miss her, but you know what I'm saying. All right, let's get down to our business for today. You ready? I'm so excited. Woo! All right, let's see. Did we not finish talking about World War II? Okay, sorry, I must have just started in the wrong place. Sorry, I left the beep on my phone. Beep on my phone. Do you hate it when you leave the beep on your phone? Propaganda, oh yeah, Zoot Suit Riot, oh yeah, internment video. And I know I'd mentioned possible extra credit. This would be what it would be about, propaganda related to World War II, which could include the internment video. So, and I know, Sebastian, you don't have to tell me again. I'm sorry, I'll put it up. And I'll give you a couple weeks to do it. I won't make it due right away. So probably, I don't know, maybe May 1st. I don't know. I know it's extra, but it's optional, so you don't have to do it. All right, Cold War. This is a defining element of my generation. The kids who graduated in the 1980s, and my dad also loved the Cold War, and it's also old people. That's why we call Russia the Soviet Union, and we don't just say communist, we say evil, godless communist, because all three of those words always go together. Yeah. Oh, and you're the class I was telling about, my student from Macedonia who got really upset because I said that. But I don't necessarily believe that communists are evil and godless. It's just, it's what we said. It's to remind you that that's kind of the way we felt about communists during the Cold War. All right, so here we go. After World War II, it became pretty clear to some people in the United States, people of color in large numbers, although not all this stuff's so complicated. Dang, history and politics and stuff like that. But if I were to show you, there's a great video series about the civil rights movement. It's called Eyes on the Prize. And it comes from a really great book about the civil rights movement called Eyes on the Prize. So, and this movement, or this video series, it's like 20 hours long. So you can watch it, but dang, you need a lot of free time. But it gives you a lot of video from the time period, or film from the time period. And they interview lots of people in the 1950s, or they show interviews from people in the 1950s during the 1950s. So in the contemporary interviews, where they ask people about racism in the time period, and they will interview middle-aged to older African-American folks. And they will say, no, we just accepted racism as part of the natural order, and we just assumed that white people must be superior, and we didn't really challenge it at all because, it wasn't worth the risk, and we could get along, fine in our own communities. And you look at that and you go like, wow. But I mean, it's a different mindset that's kind of been, pushed into people for generations. And then I think what you saw a little in World War I, with some African Americans serving overseas, but in much larger numbers in World War II, with African Americans and other people of color serving overseas, is that when they served overseas, nobody said, well, come in the back of the restaurant, or use the white person water fountain, or sit in the back of the bus or the front of the train. They didn't really do front of the train thing by this point, because the train wasn't gross and got you dirty anymore. But they didn't experience that sort of segregation in Europe. Now, if you're wondering, does that mean Europe's more wholesome and pure than the United States? They did more ethnic cleansing, World War II and World War I, and self-determination. So it's just their racial, they didn't really have so much racial prejudice, because pretty much everybody's white. We'll just say it like that. And these were the countries that were dividing up and colonizing Africa. So I'm not going to suggest to you that they had, more pure ideas or more wholesome ideas about race. They didn't have nearly as many people of color within their society. Plus, the people of color they were meeting from the United States were liberating them. So they're not going to go like, hey, is that a black guy? Do we trust him? It's like, hey, he's gone. The Americans are here. Or, yeah. So I don't know. I said all that to say I'm not sure what. I'm not trying to suggest to you that people in Europe were free of prejudice. I'm suggesting to you that their prejudices were different. However, when people from the United States, who are used to racial prejudice, whether they accept it, don't accept it or not, go overseas and they don't receive it, it's like, oh yeah, this doesn't have to happen. So when they come back to the United States, they're committed to making change. And I'm also not trying to suggest, don't get upset with me, I'm not trying to suggest that people in the United States did not resist, and try to change racial prejudice. Clearly they had for ever since there was racial prejudice, which is ever since. I mean, yeah, and within the United States, people were wanting to end slavery before the United States became officially a country, and people were wanting to end discrimination. And you had the NAACP working at it, and Ida Wells Barnett, and um, Charles Hamilton Houston, and yeah, so there are lots of folks, but it wasn't a popular movement. Like the average African American wasn't going, civil rights, that's our thing. But because so many people get drafted and have this experience overseas, and they come back and they feel really empowered to make changes. And some of that empowerment is, being treated well overseas, but also winning a war and also serving in the military. I don't know if you know a lot of people who've served in the military, but it seems to give them a different sort of confidence about themselves because they're really physically fit. They've worked well within an organization that has a purpose that they want to accomplish. And I think transferring those military, what's the word? Values, I guess we could just go with that. Transferring those military values and routines to your daily life can make you feel empowered. It's like, yeah, we're going to make a change. So, okay, I said all that to say when people came back, time to make a change. Now, the people who hadn't gone overseas or the people who really were not uncomfortable with, oh dear, I just hit something. Okay, all right, stop hitting my computer. But the people who were not uncomfortable with how the system worked here didn't necessarily want to change it. But you'll start to see a little bit of a push among people going to college, some of a push among people who served in the military, not everyone, but some, especially younger people. Because that is, I mean, it's not always where we see the change, but that's often where we see really positive change coming from younger people. I know, people gripe about you all the time, but lots of times good change comes from the young folks who see things a different way. So, all right. It was maybe too much of an introduction. I'm sorry, let's go back. All right, but we were afraid of communism because, well, it's evil and godless. And because when the Soviet Union was freeing people from the Nazis, they were also taking over their countries. And we didn't do that in quite the same way. We didn't, yeah, we're going to give lots of economic aid that's going to be really important to some of our Western European allies and to Japan. I know. But the countries that were controlled by the Soviet Union we are going to feel got oppressive governments. And if you have friends who emigrated from some of those countries, they would have to be a while ago, or maybe they were older, they would probably agree with that assessment. Sometimes the younger folks who emigrated from those countries also see some of the benefits of the socialist type of system, more consistent healthcare, more consistent educational provision, that sort of stuff. And the older people see, repression of your free speech, repression of some individual choices, especially related to religion, and maybe economic control or repression they would see as well. So, and if you were an older person and had more of a dictator than an elected leader, of course you're going to see it a different way. Okay. Soviet Union unlikely to go to war with the United States after World War II. What happens after World War II is two distinct superpowers emerge. The United States, go team, and the Soviet Union, evil, godless communists. So we knew which team we were on mostly, most of the time, and they were evil and godless, so we wanted to defeat them. We also, either through propaganda or through world events, and honestly, probably a combination of both, saw the Soviet Union as very oppressive. I'm also going to mention to you that their leader was a guy named Joseph Stalin, who was probably responsible for the deaths of 25 million people, mostly within the Soviet Union. However, killing 25 million of your own folks isn't that cool. you know, it's not any better than killing 25 million of other people's faults. And yeah, I know you're saying, well, didn't he? And I'm not talking about death necessarily because of World War II directly. There's some rough stuff that goes on in the Soviet Union for sure. All right. We're concerned about Soviet influence over Poland, Romania, Bulgaria, and intervention in Iran. Now we're going to intervene in the Middle East pretty quickly because of two things. And if you've been watching the news, you understand one of them more than you probably did before. Control of the Suez Canal. Yes, control of the Suez Canal. Why there's probably going to be a toilet paper shortage in the next couple of weeks because a giant tanker blocked the Suez Canal for, I don't know, a week. So it slowed down commerce to the tune of like $10 billion a day. So a lot of world commerce goes through the Suez Canal, and some of that world commerce is related to oil. And this is an era where we weren't necessarily the largest oil producer in the world, and the Middle East was starting to develop more oil production. So we may not be as concerned about Poland and Romania, and we don't want to have a direct fight with the Soviet Union over those, but we don't mind risking one over the Middle East. All right. The Evergreen Camp car. Okay. Yeah, no, it's true. It got stuck for sure. No, and I've seen a bunch of people posting memes about how they feel this year. That's them trying to dig out or something. It was kind of cute, I suppose. I don't know. Okay. So when the Soviet Union tried to take over Iran, we was like, nope, that's not going to happen. And one of our State Department, Defense Department advisors, George Kennan, is going to write what's referred to as the long telegram, because it's long and it was a telegram, where he talks about the best that the United States can do. We can't end communism, but it's time to very quickly try to stop the spread of it or contain the spread of it, hence the containment policy, which is not out and out war with communism, fight to the death sort of thing, but stop the spread of it. Now, he is going to suggest in that telegram that the Soviet Union would be willing to engage. I think the word that he uses is, or the phrase is, mortal combat, but which was a really trendy game, I think in the 90s or something. I don't remember because I didn't play any games like that. Pac-Man, maybe. But that was not the 90s. But Mortal Kombat, which of course implies that they're willing to fight to the death. Does it imply? Yeah, because you infer and it implies. Okay. And Winston Churchill gives an Iron Curtain speech in the great state of Missouri. He's speaking at a military academy. You don't just randomly show up. It's like, I'm going to give an important speech. Let's go to Missouri. But he does go to a military academy where he gives a graduation speech where he says that an Iron Curtain is descending all across Eastern Europe, and behind that curtain, the lights are going out. And the lights are freedom. The light of freedom is going out. You know, we're painting everything in the picture of freedom here. And the literal lights are going out because we're going to suggest also that the Eastern Bloc, the Eastern nations, the Soviet-controlled nations, are not as affluent, that they're not as economically healthy as the Western nations. There'll be all sorts of data that supports that. So we're not just bragging. We're kind of bragging, but we're not just bragging. And the reason that we're going to point that out a lot is that we are going to assert that capitalism is a more free economic system, that it gives people a greater chance to be successful and wealthy and have a good standard of living. And one of the things you'll notice if you like economic statistics is probably the most economically sound we've ever been in the United States is the 1950s and early 60s. So post World War II, man, our economy is humming. And we have a giant middle class during that time period, much bigger than we have now and much bigger than we'd ever had. And they're making bank. I mean, they're doing really well. This is that era where lots of people work at the Ford factory or, some sort of factory where they're building stuff. And they get paid enough that they can buy a house, that their spouse, their wife, I mean, it's the 50s, so it's not really sexist. It's just what it is. Their wife can stay home with the kids and they can afford to pay for their kids' college and no one goes into debt. So on one salary, tell your parents about this if they don't know. Your parents probably know. There was a time in our country where only one parent had to work. You had a nice house and you could put the kids through college and no one went into debt. Can you imagine? Can you imagine? No, your parents can't imagine either. Because my dad could, well, I don't know. I think my dad kind of missed out on that era a little bit. He needed to be a little bit older. Although they had us in the 60s, but it was, mid to late 60s. And by then the economy was starting to stink and things were a little tricky. I remember those things back from the day. But anyway, so we are trying to assert that capitalism far superior than communism. And we are also, I know that you may have had an economics class at this point or government class, or maybe not yet, but we are going to combine the ideas of communism with dictatorship. So to us, communism and dictatorship are the same thing. So it's an economic and political system that are tied together. And of course, capitalism and democracy are the same thing. Now, if you're going to ask me, where we put socialism, we don't. We just don't. And sometimes we recognize that there are social democracies, but yeah, not really. Yeah, because we assume if you're a communist, you're really a communist and you have a dictator. All right, there's a long-term struggle developing between Eastern communism and Western capitalism, and that's no joke. I mean, that happens the second World War II is over, honestly, a little bit before World War II is over, and then it lasts until I graduate from college. Not because I graduated from college, but because that's when the Berlin Wall falls and then the Soviet Union dissipates, and then, yeah, they're gone. So no more two world powers, just the United States, as it should be, until this era where it's, China. Yeah, China. What are we going to do with China? Nothing. We're not going to do anything with China. All right. So I'm not suggesting that we do. Yeah. All right. So here we go. Containment. This is our little list of definitions, because I'm pretty sure on the quiz these things are there. Oh gosh, I need to go back and look and see if I put study this for the quiz stuff. But this list of definitions here, there's a reason that I have these on here, okay? So containment is the idea of limiting, controlling, or containing the spread of communism. And I thought was and you would hear soldiers say this when they came back from wherever they fought, which would be Korea in the 50s and Vietnam in the 60s and 70s, were there a really long time. You would hear them say stuff like, we need to fight them over there so we don't have to fight them over here. And I think, I feel like I remember, friends of mine who fought in the Gulf War, which was the Saddam Hussein round one version of our fighting in the Middle East, and younger people who fought in the more modern Afghanistan, Iraq kind of stuff, say similar things. So I think that is often the philosophy in modern wars. We need to take care of the problem over there so we don't have the problem over here. And then I think more in the current era, we're assessing that maybe in a different way. I know that it was seen as unpatriotic to question that idea during the Cold War. I don't know that we have any sort of common definition of patriotic in the modern era. So I don't know if people would think you are unpatriotic if you question our involvement overseas. And I think people also are pretty good in the modern era about saying, we certainly respect the contributions of the soldiers, whether we agree with the conflict or not. And that comes out of people not saying that during Vietnam. So we'll talk about that later. But during this time period, we're talking 40s and 50s, questioning the military or US foreign policy out loud would have gotten you labeled a communist. So this is an era, and I know I just said in some ways it's a very good era economically. And part of the reason the economy is good is we're building up the military, and that's expensive. So everybody had a job. And a lot of the factories were producing stuff for the military, plus we're sending stuff overseas for our allies as they're recovering from World War II. And we had 5 or 6 years where everybody worked 2 jobs and couldn't spend any money. So they had it all saved up. And you know that Americans don't save money, we spend it. So there are lots of reasons the economy was good, but that economy is good at the same time where society is pretty much repressive of free speech if it's outside the political norm. So this is a very strange time. I know every era can say that, but this really is an odd time where you're kind of fat and happy economically, kind of. There's still certainly some poverty, but there's less of it than at any point in our history. But if your political views or your personal views or your personal life is outside the mainstream, then you could have some really serious problems. All right, back to the definitions. So sorry, 50s. It's an interesting time. Iron Curtain, partitioning of Western Europe, one side democratic and free, the other side communist controlled. So East communist, West free. And the thing I really need to point out to you, because this seems to be a point of confusion for lots of younger folks, there's no actual Iron Curtain. There's no fence. There's no wall. It's figurative or metaphor. So in the East, the iron, it's closed, it's cold, it's old, it's limited, it's out of touch, it's dangerous. And so anything behind the Iron Curtain is bad. There's no actual fence, okay? No actual fence. We're talking Soviet Union, Soviet controlled countries, and Western, okay? All right, Truman Doctrine. And one of the weird things that happens during this time period, in my opinion, weird, is that you get policy in very strange places. Like I'd mentioned the Iron Curtain speech coming from Winston Churchill's speech at a graduation. The Truman Doctrine is a press conference, and the Marshall Plan is a graduation speech at Harvard. So it's like, why are we announcing foreign policy directives at somebody's graduation speech? And if you've been to a graduation, no one listens to those speeches. But in the 50s, you had to listen because the president might issue some kind of foreign policy directive that we needed to pay attention to and might show up in somebody's college history class, right? The Truman Doctrine. This is after Germany and Greece were having, internal communist revolution. So they had a communist party in Greece and a communist party in Turkey. They were trying to overthrow I don't know, depends on your perspective, overthrow the government or win control in elections. So England had been trying to help them, but England was broke because, World War II. So they said, hey, United States, we're broke. Maybe you could help these folks out. And we said, sure, we're down with that. So Truman said, let's spend 400 million bucks trying to help Greece and Turkey resist communist control in elections and revolution, that sort of stuff. But in his speech, he pledged that we would be willing to spend whatever it took. And from your study of everything, that when somebody pledges to spend whatever it takes, we're about to spend a lot of money. So the Truman Doctrine is going to be that we are going to be willing to spend whatever it takes to help Western allies resist internal communist revolutions, or external as well. We don't want to get involved in a war. We're pretty clear about that. But we want to stop stuff before it starts, which is a new thing for us. But of course, we're going to define pretty clearly and carefully what it is we want to stop. And that is, during this era, evil, godless communism. Yeah, there you go. Marshall Plan. The Marshall Plan is really the money behind some of the pledge, and this is going to be a $17 billion expenditure in an era where 400 million was a huge amount. I know it's tricky now because we've got like the $2 billion stimulus and we're about to have the $4 billion infrastructure bill, and we're just, or trillion. I said billion, I meant trillion. I feel like I'm that guy in, what is the spy, Austin Powers. I'm the captain, whatever, the evil guy, Dr. Evil, $1 billion. But in this instance, the 17 billion was a really large expenditure, even though we're spending trillions nowadays. But $17 billion we pledged. And when we pledged this, we didn't say like, we pledged $17 billion. That's what we ended up spending. But we told our European friends, and we made this pledge to every European country, that whatever you need to rebuild, we will fund. All we have to have from you is a plan. So you give us your rebuilding plan, and then we will fund your rebuilding plan. The only thing we're requiring is that your government have a multi-party state. That means you can't just be communist. Mini me, there you go, mini me. That's what I was trying to get at there. All right. Goodness, so I feel like I'm shouting. Am I shouting at you about communism? I just feel like it today. I don't know why. This weekend, I tried to shout at a soccer game, and I forget I have vocal cord damage, so I really can't shout, but I was really trying to get somebody to stop doing something. And then I tried to shout. It's like, oh, crud, that hurts. So I don't know. I'm probably not even shouting. But anyway, Marshall Plan. It's the money behind the pledge. So we end up spending $17 billion to rebuild Western European nations who, one, request US assistance, and two, submit a governing plan that includes a multi-party state. Financial assistance ensures political and economic stability and protection against, and those are quotes from the Marshall Plan, hunger, poverty, desperation, and chaos, or chaos, if you like that better. And if we prevent all of these things, then freedom can exist and thrive without hunger, poverty, desperation, and chaos. If you have those four things, you could end up with communism, because that's the only way you would choose a system of government that isn't democracy if you were suffering. Yeah, you go like, what can get us out of this? Let's try something extreme. Yeah, okay. Marshall Plan is amazingly successful. It is. And you will see a general economic revival that leads to great production of wealth and prosperity in Western Europe that is not achieved in Eastern Europe. So there'll definitely be a difference. And we will point out that difference a lot, because we're trying to assert that capitalism is a superior system. And the way we'll be able to assert that is the countries that we've assisted, and us, we are more successful economically than our Soviet evil, godless, communist counterparts. And it would be hard to argue that we weren't correct about that. Now, I also understand that winning that argument doesn't mean that capitalism is superior. Again, those are your decisions, but if you just compare the economics during this era, certainly the Western side is going to be much more successful. Excuse me, I'm just drinking water. A problem. I don't know why it's bothering me, but here's the thing. I recognize that a big part of the reason that we're more successful in the good side, the not evil, godless, communist side, the West, is because the United States had become the arsenal of democracy in a world war where we didn't get bombed. I know, Pearl Harbor, but beyond that, our country is untouched. So our factories aren't destroyed, our farms aren't destroyed. So our economy gets stronger during World War II, because even though we're involved in World War II, we're not involved in our own land. We're not defending our homeland. Nobody's bombing us, nobody's destroying our stuff. So we don't have to repair our bridges and our buildings and our infrastructure and all that sort of stuff. And we can help because our economy is so strong, we can help our allies do that, and that happens much faster. So maybe capitalism is superior, and you can talk about that in your economics class more, because but maybe it's just better if you can get through a war without your country being bombed. Having an ocean on either side, those things they're really convenient. All right, and if you're wondering what's going on in Japan, you know what's going on in Japan. We're fixing Japan. So the US is going to rebuild Japan, and it's going to have a pretty dramatic economic revival as well. And it's going to become a world economic power. We are also going to ensure that they can never become a world military power. So we're going to help them write their constitution. We're going to insist on a new, more democratic form of government, that they can only have a small defensive military. Now, our promise to them in exchange for that is if people give you crap, we'll come and defend you. So if you're wondering, is China ever going to attack Japan? I'm going to go with a big no on that in the modern era. Is China going to harass Taiwan? I'm going to go with a big yes on that, but that's a whole different story that we'll talk about later. But China's going to leave Japan alone for a variety of reasons. And one of them is US military, at least a little while longer. I know some of you are thinking, well, that may not last. I get it. For now, yeah. In 20 years, who knows, could be a completely different reality. But we are going to insist that women get the right to vote, and that's definitely going to change society in Japan. And I know what some of you are thinking, is she really arguing that we did a great thing in Japan after we nuked it? No, I'm just telling you that we ensured voting rights for women in Japan. That's all I'm telling you. Okay, and our goal for Japan is we want them to be economically viable so that they won't succumb to the lure of, evil, godless communism. Yeah, so there you go. And our thought was China's already our ally, so that's not going to change. What could possibly change in China during this era? I'm sure they won't have a communist revolution or anything. But our thought is if we can get the East to be, this parts of Asia to be more democratic and more capitalist, that'll kind of squeeze the communism together, and isolate them in some ways. All right, back in Europe, Germany partitioned after 48. 48's when the, let's see, 41, 45. So Germany's partitioned in 48 between the four major allies, France, Great Britain, the United States, and the Soviet Union. And we always need to remember, I suppose, that the Soviet Union was an ally of the United States in World War II. Now, almost immediately after World War II, it's on, but during World War II, we're buddies. It's just the way it is. Sorry, I keep looking for my pen because I need to count somebody present. So we partitioned Germany, and the thought is that we want Germany to reunify, but we want them to reunify as a democratic country without the type of extremism that led to the rise of Hitler. But of course, because of where Germany is, it's right next to the Soviet Union. The Soviet Union doesn't want it to be, United States, Central Europe. They want it to be more of an ally of the Soviet Union. So the Western nations are going to unify their sections of Germany, and the Eastern nation is going to continue to control its section of Germany. So people in my generation think of Germany as East Germany and West Germany rather than Germany. Yeah. And there's going to be a fight. The Soviet Union wants to control all of East Germany, which includes the capital, which is Berlin. So Berlin is nestled securely in East Germany. We definitely invaded France to get control away from the Soviet Union. There's And I don't know if part of your, oh, let me go back to the chat. Sorry. Where'd it go? Chat, come back. Dang it. That's so weird. Can you see? Nope, you can't see those. Sorry. I messed up my screen, didn't I, with all the hitting it and all that strange stuff. All right, back to the chat. Sorry. Okay. Yeah, we were definitely concerned that as Stalin freed Eastern Europe, that they were going to take over more stuff. And while we allowed the Soviet Union to be, to lead the charge into freeing certain cities, we also really controlled what happened after that. So yeah, there was no point at which we really trusted Stalin. Yeah, I mean, even though he was our ally, we knew that we had concerns about their form of government. We knew that, and we also knew Stalin was a bad guy. We knew that. But it's one of those, the enemy of my enemy is my friend kind of things. All right. So Germany's partitioned, and the eastern part has the capital city of Berlin. And Berlin was also partitioned into four segments, and then you ended up with East Berlin and West Berlin. And West Berlin, we dropped off supplies, we helped run stuff. So, they had more stuff, is what I'm trying to say. So it was more prosperous. So a lot of people from that eastern part started moving into West Berlin, and this was irritating to the Soviet Union. So they decided to cut off Berlin from supplies. And that would stop the flow of people from East to West Berlin, and maybe, not make the West look as good. Plus, the Soviet Union was convinced there was no chance that the United States wanted another war, because, we still, even though we think of ourselves as big and tough, they saw us as kind of weak and isolated, and we liked it that way. And history, maybe supported them a little bit in some ways, because we had avoided wars for a couple of years when we had world wars. So their thought is, if we do this, there's no way the United States is going to do anything. Plus, 1948, guess what else is going on in the United States? One of those things we have every year, 4 years, every 4 years, presidential election. So their thought is, there's no chance that the candidate for president, Harry Truman, there's no chance that Harry Truman is going to risk anything during an election year because he wants to win. So they're going to do this in an election year, and they think there's not going to be a consequence. And if that makes you wonder, did we often intervene, or do other countries intervene in our events during election years, and do we intervene in theirs during election years? Yes, we do. Do we try to manipulate other countries' elections? Sure. Do they try to manipulate ours? Sure. Is that a new thing? Do you need Facebook and Google and Instagram? Do they do that on Instagram or Twitter to do that? No, you can just do that in other ways, like the Berlin Airlift. So what ends up happening is there's the Berlin blockade. The Soviets blocked the stuff, and then we've got to figure out, are we just going to let them do that? Are we going to instigate a war? What are we going to do? So we decide to use the military. We use the bombers to drop off supplies. So they drop off pallets of supplies with parachutes into the Soviet Union, and thousands of tons of stuff daily. We drop off stuff, and apparently it works really well. There are occasionally pallets that hit a cow or something. It's not good for the cow, but as a rule, I think people notice that the stuff is falling. And they go retrieve it, and the parachutes, generally work. So this continues to resupply Berlin, West Berlin. And then the Soviet Union thinks, well, that's pretty cute. They'll probably keep that up for a few weeks or 11 months until after the election's over and Truman's won election. And notice I'm not saying re-election. He took over the fourth term, excuse me, of FDR. FDR got elected in 44 and then dies in 45 in April after he takes office. So Truman serves out the rest of that term and then one of his own. And at that point, that's when we pass the constitutional amendment that says you can essentially only have 2 terms, 1.5 or 2 terms. And Truman got 1.5. And Truman was pretty far behind in the election before this Berlin stuff happens. And lots of political scientists speculate that his response to the Berlin blockade probably helped him quite a bit. And he's the one with the really famous picture where he's holding the newspaper that says Dewey wins. People were so convinced he was going to lose that they even printed the newspaper that said that he lost. So he, of course, went out and bought that and really enjoyed the fact that he won. Yeah. All right. But this leads to the Berlin Airlift, creation of East and West Germany, like that gets solidified, and then formation of the North Atlantic Treaty Organization, or NATO, which is still around, after the Soviet Union successfully tests an atomic weapon in '49. So once they do that, we go, oh my gosh, we got to have a group. So we form NATO, which is Western Europe, Canada, United States. And it's a military alliance to defend the West from the East. And the East doesn't build a military alliance until 1955. People during that era would argue they didn't really need to because they were all controlled by the Soviet Union. And that may be something that's a good argument or not. You get to decide that stuff. And then Truman gets elected. Yeah, okay. All right, and if you're wondering what's going on in the Pacific a lot, pretty quickly there's a conflict in Korea that in some ways mirrors what's going on in Germany. There's different, the 4 different partitions in Korea. The Western nations put theirs together, set up a government, set up an economy, and then pull the military out, not far away, mostly in Japan, but pull the military out. The Soviet Union keeps the troops in there and at a certain point decides that they will simply invade the South. So when the North invades the South, and if you're wondering where there's supposed to be 2 countries, I feel like I left that out. The goal here was to have a unified Korea that, it hadn't, there were different factions in the North and the South. The North was more nationalist, the South was more likely to be communist. So the UN goal was to have a unified Korea after an election. And neither side was really pushing for the election because neither side felt like they knew they would win for sure. South Korea was more prosperous. North Korea had more land mass and certainly, more force behind it with the Soviet Union. So the thought was that neither controlling group, West or East, was ready for the election. And I think at this point, well, definitely by 1953, Koreans were just ready for us to be out of their country because, yeah, we're going to try to rebuild and then we're going to blow them up a little bit in the process. So that's not cool. And the Korean War is often referred to as the Forgotten War because it comes so quickly after World War II, and it kind of blends in with the beginning of the Cold War, and it's overshadowed in some ways by the Vietnam conflict, which is longer. But this is a fairly intense, deadly conflict. So this lasts about 3 years, and the US will have nearly as many casualties and deaths in this war as we did in the Vietnam conflict. And of course, there's over 1 million folks who get killed in Korea, and we blow up good, large parts of their country in the process. And this is a really difficult war in military terms because it's essentially trench warfare, like World War I, where you kind of stay in one spot and fight it out to the death, but with incredibly modern, effective weapon. There's also going to be a discussion of whether or not to bring in nuclear weapons into this conflict. Can you imagine? But, we had the stuff, so our thought was maybe we should use it, the tactical use of nuclear weapons. And we will talk about that during the Korean conflict and during the Vietnam conflict. as I assume you know, we didn't use nuclear weapons in either conflict. And part of the reason MacArthur gets fired by Truman is because he keeps insisting that we use nuclear weapons, even after Truman has told him in no uncertain terms that's not going to happen. So he told him, he went over and gave him a medal and said, like, hey, MacArthur, can you cool it on the nuclear weapon talk? And then MacArthur says, thanks for the medal, and then gets his friends to start lobbying Congress to use tactical nuclear weapons in Korea. And if you're wondering, what is the major reason we didn't want to do that besides using nuclear weapons would be awful? China. Yeah, China's on the border of Korea, and we don't want to start conflicts there. And China is starting to have a revolution as well. And we just, yeah, there are lots of reasons that we don't want to get China more involved. And China's going to intervene on behalf of North Korea and the Soviet Union. So we go back to the beginning. So 1950, North Korea invades South Korea. The leader of South Korea goes to the United Nations and says, hey, United Nations, we've been invaded. Your job is to prevent wars, invasions, that kind of stuff. You're supposed to protect countries, protect us. And so the UN Security Council, which United States is, one of the big members, says, yes, we will protect you. The Soviet Union, it's like, no, but other countries, yes. So there's going to be a fairly large international contingent. I mean, a bunch of member nations will join in. Most of the troops, as you're guessing, are from the United States, some from England, Australia. There's lots of different nations, but the largest number from the United States and then South Korea. But what also happens in Korea is people get drafted, and people all the way from like 12 to 60 get drafted. You'll see that problem, a similar issue in Vietnam as well. But lots of people get involved in the conflict. It ends up in a stalemate, primarily around, and I always get the parallels wrong. I should probably look it up, because one of the wars is 19th and the other, dang. Gotta look on my phone because it's faster. Dang, a bunch of people have been texting me, and then somebody's text says, you look great. I know that's not about me because no one can see me and none of you guys are texting me. Korean conflict, sorry. Oh, crud. I've got the little map in there too. My very favorite Korean War map is in there because it shows how the war progresses. To me, it's really interesting. I must live in some sort of internet vacuum. I'm glad that it doesn't go out very often during class. I think it has just that one time. I think I found a really good Korean site because it appears to be in Korean, in a Korean language. It's a lot of characters and stuff. All right. I am so sorry, but not doing well at all. One more try, sorry. But the stalemate lasts for about 2 years along what's essentially the border between North and South Korea. Yeah, it's the 38th parallel. I'm sorry, I always get 38th and 19th confused. So it's 38th parallel in Korea, the division between North and South. That's where most of the war ends up being fought. And it's a trench warfare with really brutal weapons. So it's why a bunch of people get killed. And they have a ceasefire and peace talks for a very long time, and then just decide to end with the ceasefire and no treaty. So there's still no formal treaty and no reunification of the Korean conflict. And the fellow who's in charge of Korea now, and I always get those guys, because it's Kim Jong-il, Kim Il-sung, and then Kim, oh gosh. Korean leader. I should have looked all this stuff up before. I just didn't think about it. Kim Jong-un. It's 3 generations of the same family. So Kim Il-sung, I think, was the guy who was then, or Kim Jong-un, Kim Il-sung, and Kim Jong-il. Those are the 3. But North Korea ends up, they build a demilitarized zone along the 38th parallel. There's a ceasefire, and the United States keeps military bases in South Korea, which, as time has gone along, there are fewer and fewer people in the US military that are stationed there. And North Korea remains an unusually closed society, as you guys know. To the UN, this is kind of a sign that the UN is doing what it's supposed to do. If there's an international conflict, that they will intervene. The way that the conflict progressed is by 1950, when the invasion started, the reaction was a little slow, and almost all of South Korea, really close to the Pusan corridor, was taken over, and which is like the lower southeast part of the peninsula. And then the US sends troops there from Japan. And then MacArthur invades at Incheon, which is the western part near the 38th parallel. And then they push up together and meet near the 38th parallel, and then push all the way up to the Yalu River, which is near the border it's part of the border of China and North Korea. And then the China is going to add troops because they don't want any of these UN forces going into China. So China's going to donate a couple 100,000 troops, which is, so with the Soviet weapons, Soviet leadership, and the Chinese troops, they push back down to the 38th parallel, which is where they fight for the next couple of years. Now, the biggest part, there are 2 things that probably lead to the end of the Korean conflict. One, we are going to elect Dwight Eisenhower as president, and he's going to promise to go to Korea himself to end the war. And, he's the World War II guy and the head of NATO, and he had been the Supreme Allied Commander. So we believe, he's the guy that's got the experience and knowledge to do this kind of stuff. The other thing that happens is Stalin dies. And Stalin was the big reason that this conflict was being well funded. People in the Communist Party apparently did not agree with Stalin. But if you disagreed with Stalin, he had you killed. So nobody was really that interested in disagreeing with Stalin. And he didn't just have you killed, he had your whole family killed or your whole group killed. Like he went through several different purges where he purged doctors, he purged military leaders, he purged different factions of his own party. So he makes sure lots of folks get killed if a group or somebody affiliated with a group disagrees with him. So disagreeing with Stalin is a deadly sort of thing. But Stalin dies, and then the rest of the Communist Party is like, yeah, we didn't want to spend the money to start with. So they told China and North Korea, is like, you guys keep going, but we're not giving you any more stuff. China's full, they have enough folks. I mean, they've got troops, but neither North Korea nor China could sustain the military part, the materiel that was needed in the conflict. So that really, the election of Eisenhower maybe pushed the end of this, but probably more so the death of Stalin and the Soviets' lack of desire to continue funding this conflict, because they just didn't feel like it was economically feasible. All right, but this is, well, it's part of the Cold War. This is an actual war as well. It's not a declared war. It's referred to as a conflict because it's a UN action. So nobody officially declares war, but there's, people are fighting and millions of people die. So it's, it's war, just by another name, I suppose. And this is really that sign that the Cold War, while the United States and the Soviet Union aren't going to directly fight each other, they really don't mind blowing up somebody else's country to fight to support their ideologies. All right. And in the meantime, other stuff's going on. Cultural Cold War, and I think you might find this interesting, just another reason to read that textbook. The CIA and the Defense Department are going to fund the arts. I know you're going, of course they are, but it's in part because they're producing movies and posters and stuff, films, that really promote a Western lifestyle, Western culture, Western democracy. And the CIA and Defense Department are also going to make sure that that art and music and literature and whatever gets spread throughout the entire world, because we want the entire world to realize how superior our system is. Now, if you're wondering, oh, I feel like it's almost time for a warning too, but if you are wondering, are we doing this just to be, I don't know, elitist, or, who knows the answer to that? Is this some sort of cultural, I don't know, nationalism or cultural imperialism? Yeah, it is. Is the motive just so the United States can control stuff? Maybe. But it might also be that we thought our system was more free. So it's a combination of those things. It's always a combination of those things, I think. You don't have to agree with me, of course, because there are always people who are just pure ideologists. They're just all about the thought process and the philosophy behind it, and they want to argue, the philosophy, that kind of thing. There are people who are opportunists, who go like, oh, this would be a great way for me to make money, releasing my new album overseas, or if you own a recording company or a film company, this is great for you. In the military, this gives you an opportunity, this kind of international involvement gives you an opportunity to try out new stuff, advance your career, that kind of thing. And if you're a defense contractor, and I know that certainly wasn't part of funding the arts, but that's also, this circle of things, what Eisenhower will later call the military industrial complex, creates a lot of money and is part of the reason the economy was really good. So all these things are tied together. And I'm not one of those people who's going to say, well, the only reason we're involved in the Cold War is because it makes money. I don't think that's it. Thank you. But I do think that's part of it. I hope that you're starting to gather that I somewhere fit in the middle politically, which is a weird place to be, which I had a former colleague tell me that means I can't make a decision. And it's like, yeah, that's exactly what it means, or it means we don't agree. We didn't agree. But I just think that most issues are more complicated, more complex than right or left. It's always the money, it's always the philosophy, it's usually some of each, but you don't have to have that conclusion, of course. There are reasons that I've come to that conclusion that you wouldn't share because of age and background and experience and stuff. Also why, I told a colleague who said that, I had a kind of a weak opinion. It's like, no, I have an opinion that's formed from different knowledge and experience. Why would my opinion be the same as yours? But if you agreed with me, I would be shocked. Why? You're less than half my age. You definitely haven't had the same experiences. And that's not, and don't read that as me saying your opinion is not as well informed. It is well informed. It's just different. And my opinion, hopefully, changes over time as I learn new stuff. It's kind of the idea as we learn new stuff. All right, I'm going to stop there because I got the warning.